There's around about 18 different schemas. And these are belief systems that will hold a person back from their happiness. One of the schemas, for example, is unrelenting standards, which often comes from a parental environment where their love was conditional. It wasn't unconditional. It was, I will love you and you are good enough provided you're complying with these criteria. So that makes the young person feel like being just who they are won't ever be enough to secure love in their life. So what they do as adults is they're striving continuously to do better. They aim for perfectionism in a bid to get this love that they feel that they're not worthy of. The average person that's had the average dysfunctional upbringing might have 3, 4, maybe even 5 schemas to varying degrees. Once you know your schema, mistrust could be a schema, for example. You might have the schema of abandonment. You might have the schema of defectiveness, where you believe that you are inherently flawed and therefore unlovable. Once you know your schema, you'll see it at play, because in addition to the core schemas, and this is where schema therapy gets complicated, we have various modes that we operate according to. We have our coping modes, which were previously called defense modes, which was the way we interact with the world to try to protect us from activating our schemas. So one mode might be to an avoidance mode. So anytime a person's in a situation where their particular schemas could be activated, they will avoid being in that situation. You can do the overcompensation mode, which is where you want to do the opposite to all of the schemas that you're suffering from. And then the third mode that you might operate according to is the surrender, where you just lean back into the same patterns as when you were growing up and you're just templating it in your adulthood. And of course, you know, all of these things are detrimental to your well-being as a person that's experiencing the mental health challenges, but also you run the risk of perpetuating it in terms of, you know, having similar behaviours as a parent as you've experienced, and therefore your children may be inheriting some of the really big challenges that you've gone through, which no parent wants. So the trick is to understand why we're doing the things that we're doing and explore, is there, you know, do I have schemas? Do I have early maladaptive traits? Are certain modes at play? And then we've also got other modes, which are like the modes that are kicked in when we're being activated or triggered. And that could be our child modes and our parent modes. So the child mode could be where we're impulsive or angry or irritable, and it's that underdeveloped part of ourselves that almost just regresses to not having that impulse control to regulate our emotions in a healthy way. In terms of our parent modes, or the inner critic is another way it's described, that could be an example of where we're being very harsh with ourselves and critical or demanding or expectant. Just to give you an example of some of the other schemas at play, they're quite interesting, and I'm always fascinated when people identify with certain schemas. Like there's the negativity schema, where everything in life you believe ultimately has a downside, and you know, your lens will always involve seeking and seeing the negative in something. There's the grandiosity schema that you see in people, where they're always talking about themselves and they're always talking themselves up, and they've got this bravado that sometimes makes them seem very unappealing. They're probably the most vulnerable and the most damaged of all, because they so deeply believe that they are unworthy, that they have to compensate by all of this bravado about their successes and achievements, because they believe without that, they're nothing. They don't identify with all the other rich, beautiful qualities that they possess. There's schemas around impulsivity and that sort of immediate sort of responding to the environment in a very knee-jerk kind of way without being thoughtful or, methodical in your decision-making. Another schema, for example, is self-sacrifice. And again, it's around worthiness. It's around this feeling that if I don't give everything to others, if I'm not responsive to other people's needs, then again, I'm going to be unlovable. What we want to do is identify these themes in a person and give them other ways, other tools to manage once they've been triggered, so they don't need to use their modes that protect them anymore. Because sometimes these modes push people away, or they get really enmeshed because that's where they feel safest. What we want them to do is reparent themselves with the guide of an experienced psychologist.